that everybody is on the same page. I continue to get homework from you and try to get feedback back as quickly as possible. Okay, so we've been looking at the transformational lesson plan. So most of this, I think, let me just go back. The exegetical idea is the text idea, the central idea, the main idea of the text. We don't want to confuse that with the andragogical idea or the pedagogical idea, which is what the students are going to learn from this. What is the governing objective? There are 3 objectives that are associated with this. Actually, there's 4 objectives that are associated with this lesson plan. The governing objective is the relevance. That is the first one. The second one is the revelation. That's the content or the cognitive objective, but related to the revelation. And then the third one is the responsibility, which is just another word for what are the principles, what are the primary things that I need to bring over from that ancient text to this day and this time that I want my students to learn. And we've not talked about results, but the last one is the active learning objective, the active learning objective. In other words, what are they now going to do about it? We haven't gotten to that one yet. And so our recap is going to be primarily the revelation and responsibility again. So relevance, you can see here what I plan to do. Now notice that it's set up differently a little bit here, but you can see some of the same thing here. What is the relevance of where I'm going? My family narrative environments have positive and negative impact on how I view godliness. What is my topic? Again, remember, you lose your blessing by accepting ungodly advice, even if it's from your family. In other words, your family can teach you how to do certain things. They might teach you how to drink, might teach you how to take drugs, might teach you how to be racist, may teach you how to be chauvinist. You know, there are a lot of things that we learn that are not of God, that as we learn are of God, then we don't want to lose our blessings from God. As a matter of fact, we don't want to cause an issue, an offense between us and someone else, even, which is a missed blessing. And so we want to do things God's way. And so there's my method right there. But notice that there is no evaluation. There's just simply the transition. Now I'm going to move to my cognitive learning objective, but revelation. Now, let me bring something out to you. If you notice that in this objective, that it is worded differently, students will comprehend. The difference between this cognitive, they're both in the cognitive domain, but the cognitive learning objective must be specified by what level of learning that the students are expected to hit. And why is that? Because you want to be also able to evaluate. So there should be some kind of way that they're going to show that they've learned it, or you teach it in this way, and that these two ought to match. Because if they are, let's say you're teaching on the knowledge level, memorization, recitation, and you're using that methodology where they have to memorize let's say the 10 Commandments. Well, your evaluation has to be on that level. You can't teach on the knowledge level and then expect students to be evaluated on a comprehension or application or analysis or synthesis level. That's not going to be fair because you haven't taught them on that level. So that's very important right there in terms of the writing your learning objective and how they're going to show that they have learned it. So if you see here, okay, by doing a figurative word study of Psalms, this is how they'll show their comprehension. So students will compare their findings with other course mates' findings. I will know the learners have connected with the revelation by oral feedback or giving their own figurative comprehension means I can define it, I can relate it, I can translate it into my own words, and I'm giving it back. That shows comprehension. Now, the next area, yes, did I hear something? Oh, okay. All right, is responsibility. Now, this is where we've been, but we'll take it easy a little bit here because this actually goes to the next learning domain of which we call your values or the affective learning domain, which is basically talking about your values. Now, you might ask the question, well, if you got a cognitive domain, why do you need to teach from a values, the affective learning domain? Well, much of what we teach biblically is values. Take, for instance, when we tell people that you have to accept Jesus into your heart, or confess that with your mouth, and confess that with your mouth and believe that in your heart that Jesus Christ is Lord. What you're really saying is a value judgment. When people accept Christ, then you're actually teaching values. That's why oftentimes various religions are referred to as a person's values. So what is now look at my statement. Students will value, I gotta move this over just a little bit, value the principles in Psalms 1:1 by comprehending who they should accept advice from. All right, so if you look at the first part A, I write down what those values are and where I find them. So 1A, 1B, and 1C. You've gone over this, with me many times, and with that verse, it's just, about don't sit, don't walk, don't stand. Okay, those are the principles. What is the response to these principles? And then that is your part B. All right, how am I going to teach this? This is coming straight from the text. These principles, I have unearthed them. What are the principles in my text? Students will develop their own open-ended case study for each principle. The group will draw conclusions on how the case study will pan out. Case studies are very, very good for teaching principles, what people will do. And so, if you notice, students will orally give a definition of each principle. It's basically their own words, and that's basically is teaching what those principles are. The transition learners will take responsibility for changing a part in terms of these principles of their lives that they're going to change. Now, that's results, and we're not doing that right now, but I just want to go back here a moment. If you notice that that learning objective, the affective, the values learning objective has changed. It's not a cognitive anymore. Students will value. There are many words I could have used for value here, They would have gained a sense of importance. They would have, could have, students will gain a sense of priority. You know, that's basically what that's saying. What I want to do now is to move you to understanding these domains of learning better so that you can phrase your learning objectives in terms of these three learning domains. Think of a learning domain like a corral with horses in it. In corral A, you have brown horses. In corral B, you have white horses. In corral C, you have black horses. And so you have the brown horses, the white horses, and the black horses. Now, in teaching, you can mix those domains some, but it's still, you're going to have a primary learning objective. What do we mean by that? Let's say that you're working from the active domain, even though we haven't talked about that yet, but you know what active is. You're learning how to drive a car, all right? A part of learning how to drive a car requires a cognitive learning objective where you learn that driver's manual. That's pure cognitive. Matter of fact, you have to show that you have learned it. The method is they give you the book, and then you have to show that you have that you've learned it by putting in from memorization the words or the right letters to the multiple choice or whatever. You don't really have learned how to drive at that point. What you've done is you've learned about driving, but it is necessary in order for you to learn to drive. Also, there will probably be some value questions on that, such as the right of way, people who are in a crosswalk, they may be crossing the crosswalk illegally, but don't just run folk over. So all of those things are important to active learning, but I think all of us would admit that driving a car is primarily an active domain learning objective. In other words, at the end of this, a person should be able to drive a car. So think about those three domains of learning, and this will make sense to you. Cognitive is thinking, affective is valuing, active is performing or result. Let's not worry about that third one right now. But again, the first two, cognitive is dealing with the head. What do you want people to know? How do you want people to think differently? These are the questions that you're raising when you frame your learning objective. What do they need to understand? Now, again, if you use the term understanding, it is fine to use it in your relevance learning objective, but in the revelation learning objective, you're going to want to make sure that the level of learning, which we're going to go over again in just a moment, is very, very clear, because you're going to have a test. You're going to have some way of evaluating that, you know, when you go through it. Affective domain is values and attitudes. All right. So three domains of learning, again, cognitive thinking, affective is values, active skills and doing. So let's look at the cognitive domain first. We have gone over this, but I want to go back over it again with you. The lowest level, if you want to look at the cognitive domain, there's basically two primary parts. There is knowledge, and then all of the rest, comprehension, application, analysis, synthesis, and evaluation, those are all part of understanding. So when you frame your revelation learning objective, cognitive learning objective about the text, then it should relate to one of those 5 levels of learning. Comprehension, well, really 6. It could be knowledge. knowledge, comprehension, application, analysis, synthesis, evaluation. It's got to be one of those six. Now, remember, now you have to tell what is the indicator, because it's not just that the student will apply or the student will analyze or the student will synthesize, but they got to show that they have learned it. So by what? Well, if it's knowledge, then some type of memorization. You know, another word for memorization is recitation or restatement, giving it back in the same way that they got it. Now, if we move up a level, then the learning becomes more difficult, more challenging, comprehension. I think I like to use the acronym DIRT, definitions, interpret, relate, translate. Just think of all of these as being in your own words. In other words, define in your own words, interpret in your own words, or give back the meaning in your own words, relate in your own words, translate into another language in your own words. So the difference between comprehension and knowledge basically is that the student is going to give an indicator that they have learned at that level. If it's on the first level, by giving it back exactly like they received it. If it's on the comprehension level, which is higher, then they'll give it back, but in their own words. So application, some kind of way where they would have to now apply that. Analysis is always an outline or breaking up something. In a sense, I am teaching you about teaching. I am teaching you about teaching by breaking up the parts of teaching. Now, when you give your lessons, when you take your lesson plan and you put it together, then that's going to change the teaching from analysis to synthesis, bringing it together. And see, when you teach at the synthesis level, what you're basically doing is you are empowering a student to be able to write 1,000,000 lesson plans. So it's just like for those of you in school, you had to write a paper. Well, you probably had to do research first, and the research showed your analysis skills. That's why we call it an analytical paper. But then when you wrote several of these papers, you're doing synthesis. Evaluation basically means to compare to a standard. You produce a standard of something. Let us say that our belief is that the Bible, the Old Testaments and the New Testaments are the standard for doing theological study. You know, after having proved that that is, then you can compare. Let's say I was to do a comparative analysis of Seventh-day Adventists or the Mormon religion or the Muslim religion. That would be comparing it. You know, what makes the Bible, Old Testament and New Testament, the standard for theological study, and then comparing other books or texts to that. If you ever took an apologetics course, that's basically what that is. You are comparing the text of these particular areas to the standard of the Bible. So just an example of stating those learning goals. The student will be able to memorize the Roman road. Well, obviously, that is the students will learn at the lowest level, because knowledge is always memorization or giving it back like it is. Students will be able to define the Roman road verses in their own words. Now, we're taking it up a notch, because this is going to give some kind of meaning or understanding. Remember, I'm going to use my acronym DIRT to help me to write these other comprehension level learning objectives. Let me go back there again. Students will be able to relate the Roman road to a marked New Testament. You may not know what a marked New Testament is, but a marked New Testament is basically where you mark your Bible so that it leads from Romans 3:23 to Romans 6:23 to Romans 5:8 to Romans 10:13, which is the Roman road. And then the last one, students will be able to translate the Roman road into Spanish or pictures or music. And so those are all comprehension statements. I think until you feel a little bit more competent in writing your student learning goals, just use this: students will be able, because that is an empowering statement, which basically says after they have learned this, they should be able to give it back just like they've learned it. Give it back in their own words. Be able to translate this into Spanish. Now let's take it up a little bit higher, still in the cognitive domain. Students will be able to apply the Roman road with other students. In other words, they're now taking those 4 verses, the Roman road, and they are reciting it or either interpreting it to another peer. So applying it with other students. Peer learning. Students will be able to outline the Roman road verses in modern day language. Whenever you see that term outline, it is a giveaway for analysis. Outline, breakup, these research, these are all terms which basically mean to do analysis or break it up. Take, for instance, the Lord's Prayer. If we were to say students will be able to recite the Lord's Prayer, well, that's just a knowledge statement. Reciting the Lord's Prayer is to give back that prayer in its knowledge form. Give it back just like it is. But if we were to say that students are going to outline the Lord's Prayer, well, there's basically only 2 parts to the Lord's Prayer. When we do an analysis of it, the first part is to God. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name, thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. The second part is to me. Give us this day our daily bread and forgive us our trespasses. So an outline of the Roman road verses would be those 4 verses. What's going on in it? Number 1, all have sinned. Everybody has gone against the word of God. Everybody has missed the mark. The results or the wages of this is death. You're going to die, but you're going to be quarantined forever. It's not just that you're going to die and be in a grave forever, but you're going to be separated from God forever. Romans 5:8, God has sent Jesus Christ, who even before we were saved, even before we accepted him, he demonstrated his love for us for dying on the cross. And then last, Romans 10:13, if you confess with your mouth and believe in your heart that Jesus Christ is Lord, in other words, that he is the landlord of your life. He is the owner of your life. You want to be a kingdom person. So see, I've just outlined the Roman road verses, and I could give that back in a dozen different ways as long as that outline remains the same. Number 7, students will rewrite the Roman road as points in the sermon. Now we have synthesis. Could have said rewrite the Roman road as points in a teaching lesson. Rewrite the Roman roads in a sermon or teaching session means that I can do many of these. I can do a number of these. So I can take my analysis and rewrite them in such a way that now I can preach it or I can teach it. Students will be able to decide, given the best situations for using the Roman road. Whenever you are using a standard, it is almost always that the student has to be able to decide in light of one thing versus the standard, what is the best way to use this. So these are just some examples of using the cognitive domain. And I would say that as you do these, think about these for right now. Let me stop for a minute and allow you to raise any questions.
How do we apply these? Are these tools for us to establish our lesson plan and delivery to the students?
All right, think about your lesson plan for a moment. Let's do this. I'm gonna back up things here a second. In just 1 minute. All right, here's your lesson plan. Let's start off with the beginning, okay? See that learning objective at the top of the your content, your Bible stuff, Revelation. You see how that's stated? Students will comprehend.
Okay.
Okay, that's coming right out of the level. So immediately in the student's mind, immediately in your mind, you are saying, this is the level that I want my student to learn. I want them to be able to comprehend what's going on in this taking bad advice.
Okay.
Am I making sense?
Yeah.
Now, I want you to notice something, Gene, that my evaluation has to match this methodology. So in other words, if I teach, let's go here to the comprehension level. If I teach at the comprehension level, then I also have to evaluate at that level. I can't teach at the comprehension level and then have you to evaluate at an analysis level or a synthesis level because it's too high.
Okay.
Am I making sense?
Yeah.
The rest of you, is that making sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. So what you want to do, whatever level you're teaching at, you want to make sure that your evaluation is actually giving you back an indicator that they comprehended, if that's the level you're teaching on. A lot of teaching takes place on this level, but as you teach adults, then you have to go up higher. In a sense, I can't teach you teaching by simply teaching you at the knowledge level, because you're going to be expected to do a lesson plan, right? So I've got to teach you at this level. I've got to teach you at a level where you're going to be able to produce many lesson plans. Am I making sense? So what I'm doing is I'm giving you the parts. I'm actually teaching you at the analysis level and the synthesis level. Why? Because in the end, who is going to be doing their student teaching before the church?
Us.
Yeah, not me, you are. So the students are going to be able to teach the transformational lesson plan. Yeah, so do you see why I'm doing this in this way? Daniel, Lindsay, is this making sense to you? Okay.
Yes.
Get your hands up. Okay. All right. Now, this is stuff that you really have to get in your brain, because each time when you move from this is only for the cognitive domain. Because when you go to responsibility and you teach the principles, then you're going to go to, let's get past this. Then you're going to go to the affective domain. Now, let's look at what the levels are for the affective domain. The first two levels are the same as the cognitive domain. Now, why is that? Because when you teach values, or even when you teach people how to do something, you really should teach them why, and that's why you learn the book about driving a car before you learn. Now, some people will put you, I know like a lot of kids in the country, they learn how to drive they put them underneath the wheel when they're 11 years old, 10 years old. But in the city, you can't do that because you got all these cars. So you have to teach comprehension and knowledge first, where really you should teach that. Is that making sense? So that's going to be in all of your domains of learning. Then the third level is valuing. Now, that's still a cognitive statement. Let me give you an example why, even though it's value. Oftentimes, when I was pastoring in Syracuse, I haven't done this in Vallejo or Vacaville, but when I was in Syracuse, some of the members, they used to drink a lot. I didn't drink with them, but they did. And there was a local tavern that they would visit. And so oftentimes I would teach on, how the two didn't mix, following Christ and drinking, especially drinking with other people. Now, I know that the Bible does not say you can't drink. And so, I'm actually teaching a value statement. Are you with me? That's a value of Leroy Gainey. I don't think, and especially if you're a leader and you're drinking with other leaders, I just think that is not good. All right. So, but it's still in the knowledge domain. I mean, in the cognitive domain. I'll show you why. I would go into the bar, and many times my parishioners would see me, and the first thing they would do, now this is not a bottle of alcohol right here, or a glass of alcohol, but when they'd see me, Diane, they would take their glass and go like this, and put it behind their back. Now, why do you think they do that?
They were ashamed.
They were ashamed. And they wanted to let me know that they heard me.
Mm.
And that they had learned this is not a good thing. Even though their behavior, their commitment to this value, you see, you can't get a commitment to values if they don't know what the value is. Am I making sense? That's why it's cognitive first. That's why I have to get a good understanding here before moving up in the levels. I want to show you something else, that when you're teaching values, and here's where a lot of teachers mess up, and that is the fourth level is there's got to be a conflict of value. Now, why is that? Because people are not born with knowledge. They're not born with information. That's why they go to school. Kindergarten, they get the first three things in it. This is good, this is bad, this is why. Now, I want you to live your life like this. There has to be a values conflict because all human beings are born with values. What is the value that you're born with? Survival. You're going to find out where your nourishment comes from very quickly. And if you don't get it, what are your babies going to do, Lindsay, when they don't get their nourishment?
Cry.
Yeah, they're going to cry. And that crying lets you know you better hurry up and take care of my selfish need. You didn't have, who taught them that? Nobody taught them that. They came out of the womb already programmed to take in nourishment. So God put every person is born with that. There's a self thing in you to survive, to exist. Well, when you're teaching values, like in other words, you want Jesus to be the most important value. Am I right?
Right.
All right. If you want Jesus to be the most important value, then whatever value that it is that is most important to you, there's got to be some kind of conflict for you to get, that has to come second. You know, you've heard me preach many times, you know, Cheryl is a great wife, but she's a poor God. Why is that? Because I've already had that value conflict. I can't make Cheryl my God. I cannot worship her. Am I making sense to you?
Mm-hmm.
So I've got to teach, if I want a person, see the end of my values, the highest value teaching is when the value is incorporated. Example, I'm going to use a today's lesson. You know, we saw a lot of people who were protesting that were marching peacefully, and nobody had a problem with that. Why is that? Because it represented our Christian values. Are you with me?
Mm-hmm.
It represented our Christian values of peace and so forth. When we saw people looting, when we saw people fighting the police, when we saw people fighting each other, now you ask many of those folks, they might tell you, I am a Christian, but it would appear from everything that you know biblically, they may understand what valuing is, but they're not living it. It's not incorporated. Are you with me? And I want to say to you that a big part of church teaching is that we don't teach at this level, and we expect people to act right without making sure whatever it is that is priority for you, that there is, you know, some choosing. Give you a more simple example. I used to do this at my former church, and I do it purposely. I would wait until the NBA championships were on. Okay? The NBA championships, the Lakers against Sacramento. Okay, everybody wants to see that. But I believe that evangelism is way more important than the NBA finals. Matter of fact, you can record the finals today. So what I would do to teach at this level is say, we have scheduled a field trip. That's a learning environment. It's different than the classroom, where you now have to make a choice, where you will either go out and practice evangelism, or you will stay and you will watch the game. See, if value comes, there's always got to be a decision in order to incorporate the value. If they can't do it, then it means it's not there. You know, I wouldn't have any problem if somebody asked me, what comes first, my wife's anniversary or the NBA? I wouldn't have any problem in that. I wouldn't have any problem in that at all. on my, your husband, what comes first? But if we want to teach that Jesus is first, then we have to first teach on the level of choice. Before you can teach on this level, there has to be some kind of conflict, because the value will have not been at least proven to stick at least one time. I myself personally, when you teach on this level, Value Incorporated, I think the only way that you can do that is to observe. In other words, you would set up not a case study, but a real life situation where you would watch a person over a 2-month, a 3-month period to find out if values were incorporated. In other words, you might even have them observed by their peers or observed by people that they don't know are observing them to find out if the value is incorporated. Am I making sense to you?
Yeah.
So when you write your learning objective, you need to keep that in mind. Knowledge and comprehension are still the same as the cognitive domain. Valuing is still a part of cognitive. It's a part of thinking. So I have to teach what the value is so that they know. Evangelism. Yeah, it's just a word. I have to teach why that is important. I have to first get that in their mind. Now I have to choose a method that will have them where they have to make a choice. Is that making sense to you? Where they have to decide. And then Value Incorporated, where they are doing, it's a part of their thinking and their behavior. Let's look at what some student learning objectives written out might look like for the affective domain. Okay, here we go. All right, so students will be able to memorize the Roman road. Oh, I see right off there, that is the knowledge level. Students will be able to define in their own words the Roman road. I see, we're now into comprehension or understanding. Students will be able to value the importance of the Roman road. Still thinking, but we have raised this learning objective now, that they at least understand what the value is, even though they may not be living it. Students will be able to decide what's more important, going to a baseball game or going witnessing. So now I have set up a choice. Students will display a lifestyle that depicts the Roman road as their personal testimony. Do you see how I've worded those so that each one of them are now what I did not do here is to take those, like, in other words, students will be able to memorize the Roman word. I would put by what? By reciting it. Define, putting it by what? By giving it back in their own words. Valuing, by showing that they know that this is important, to them. But remember, this is still at the thinking level. Now we're moving into value. Students will be able to decide what's more important, going to a baseball game or witnessing, by setting up a night where students will go out and witness. And then students will display a lifestyle that depicts the Roman road as their personal testimony by being observed for 3 months or 2 months. You actually, if you were doing teacher training in the public school system, you would have to be observed, because there's certain values that the teacher must have. You'd have to be observed for a year that those values are part of your lifestyle. How you talk to the students, how you deal with their, acting out and so forth. And then you'd be evaluated on that. Lifestyle is not something that you can teach in a classroom, because lifestyle in and of itself says that, okay, this is going to be going on all the time. Let me stop there for a minute. Is that making sense?
So is lifestyle then, is that kind of like putting the Roman road in the, I don't know, is it first person, like I have sinned and fall short of the glory of God?
Well, lifestyle is if the Roman road, really the Roman road is really about the way to salvation. Are you with me?
Yeah.
And so I'm just teaching that the end result of the Roman road, the reason why I give the Roman road is because I want you to accept Jesus Christ.
Right.
Am I making sense?
Yeah.
And accepting Jesus Christ is a value. It does have cognitive elements in it, but it's primarily a value. I want you to value, I want Jesus to be the priority of your life. I don't want you to just know about it. I want him to be important to you, utmost important. So not only am I going to teach the cognitive stuff, memorization, comprehension, but I'm also going to teach about, I want you to accept Jesus. And I want you to accept him as a lifestyle. So I'm using the Roman road as an example because most of us know the Roman road, but the purpose of the Roman road is so that we can evangelize. It's not just to memorize. It's not just to be smarter in. It's so that we can understand who Jesus is and accept him as a lifestyle. And it's just one way that we use, but it's been a long time way that has been demonstrated to be very effective. Romans 3:23, Romans 6:23, Romans 5:8, Romans 10:13. Just having that will help you to lead a person to value Jesus, to accept Jesus as their personal savior. Making sense?
Yes.
So when you write your learning objectives for the revelation, for the responsibility sections, that learning objective needs to be, it should reflect these learning levels. The relevance objective, you can say understanding. It's usually cognitive, but not the revelation objective. The revelation objective needs to be taught in terms of what level it is, because you're going to test that. And I'll also say this, a lot of Bible teaching in churches tend not to be as effective as it could be. And to tell you, we're notorious for not having evaluation.
Okay.
We tend to just teach Bible, and we think that people have learned it because we've taught it. No, people have learned it because they have demonstrated that they either know it or they understand it, or it is of value to them. When you don't have evaluation, then basically people just sort of just go on, and churches don't become better either in their knowledge, what scripture says, or in what they can do with it, because there's no evaluation. In my former church, we created a culture of evaluation, from the pastor down to the teachers, the staff. Everybody got evaluated for what it is they were supposed to do. And what that did was that made everybody pick their game up. Earlier I had told Sister Lindsay, she's a very challenging student, and I like that. Sister Diane, you have a very similar spirit. And I like that because a teacher is always going to teach to their most inquisitive student, to their bright. They're always going to teach to that level. Why is that? Because that's where your challenge comes from. And so I don't mind that, but that is a form of evaluation. And, you know, being a professor for 33 years, I've been evaluating hundreds of classes. And I'm better at this craft because of what students have told me. I'm better at this craft because I take what they say seriously.
Mhm.
Are you with me?
Yeah.
And really, I don't just want to be a better student. Teacher, I want them to be better students because some of them, like Jesus said, you're gonna be way better than I am at teaching. You know, if you're taught right and you are evaluated. All right. Let me see. We've got about 5 more minutes. I want to go to a lecture part here real quick. We're not doing the active domain, but let me just, okay, here we go. Okay, let me go through, this will be the last thing that I do right here. It's my lecture part. All right, teaching isn't happening if learning isn't happening. So there has to be some kind of evaluation that students have learned, whatever it is that you're teaching. So creating a lesson plan with intentional, measurable outcomes are very, very important. And these learning objectives and indicators are. So what are the elements, the learning goals, the appropriate activities, the resources that you need, the adequate space, and evaluation criteria. So we already talked about the 3 domains of learning. All right, the goal indicators, what are they again? We say what we want the student to learn. The goal indicator is knowledge, comprehension, application, analysis, synthesis, evaluation. The indicator is by what are they going to show? What are they going to do that shows that they have learned it? And that will also be it'll be clear in your methodology, and it's going to be clear in your evaluation. So change, here's a statement of learning. The learner will know the 7 realities of experiencing God. Here's what that should look like. The learner will demonstrate knowledge as the lowest level, memorization of the 7 realities of experiencing God. How are we going to know that they have learned it at the knowledge level? By, everybody say by.
Bye.
By reciting them. There's the verb. By reciting them from memory at the front of the classroom. So this should match. The learner will demonstrate their knowledge of the 7 realities of experiencing God. By what? By reciting. And most of you, have you taken Experiencing God?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. If you were never taught what those realities are, I'm talking about where you had to be evaluated for it, I would guarantee you probably have lost those 7 realities. Am I wrong or right?
I remember one really important
You
one.
remember one? Okay. Well, I'm just simply saying that, you know, we want to stick. All right. Evaluation helps things to stick. Believe me. All right. Indicators define the criteria by which learning can be evaluated. In other words, if I say to you that you're going to memorize by what? By reciting, now I know how I'm going to evaluate you. Am I making sense there, Gene? Yeah, if I'm clear on what the criteria is, then I can build an evaluation. I can build a test. I can build something that will help me to know that you've learned that. Learning levels target the suitable indicators. measure cognitive knowledge with memorization, recitation, and listening. This is just looking at knowledge. Measure effective caring with sensitive, attention, eagerness, satisfied, commitment, priority. These are verbs that all say, I have a value that is a part of me now. Activities are appropriate when they are appropriate to their targeted learning domain level. The activities will dictate the necessary and adequate space and resources. Time is the kind of space and resources that is usually limited. Now, next week, what I plan to do with you all, because we're coming to sort of the 3/4 of the way through, I will teach you about the results learning objective, which is the active learning objective. We'll go through the levels there because those levels are different than the cognitive and the affective, but they are appropriate to you measuring if a person can do whatever it is that you are expecting to do. And you should, this is teaching, and why it's called transformational. It's teaching to the whole person, the thinking, the values, the heart, and the active domain, the doing. It doesn't matter if you're teaching preschoolers or you're teaching middle child or you're teaching youth or you're teaching adults. You're teaching to the whole person. So next time we will get to, and we'll talk a little bit about, what are the characteristics of preschoolers? What are the characteristics of youth? What are the characteristics of adults as it relates to the learning, teaching moment? Okay? All right. Well, I think it's almost time, or it's right on time for us to, let me see, stop recording.